being a self-taught web developer sounds pretty cool, right? It gives you the opportunity to have a little bit of bragging rights. People are like, hey, where did you learn how to build apps or websites or whatever? And you're able to say, I was able to teach myself. And that's cool, except that it's actually pretty difficult when you get down to the nitty gritty. You find yourself getting pretty disheartened. You find yourself saying things like, why did I sign up for this in the first place? Or why is that person so much farther along than I am right now? And if you're going to be successful in actually learning this stuff, you've got to have a game plan. You've got to have a game plan for staying motivated, and you've got to have a game plan for how you're going to teach yourself. And that is exactly what we are talking about in this week's episode with Mr. Zac Gordon. Hey, I want to welcome you to the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast. So glad that you are here with us this week. We had a bit of a milestone this past week. We reached the 10,000 download mark, and I just want to say, wow. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me, for telling friends, for leaving a rating and a comment and review. It's been a wild ride, and I'm super happy about how things are turning out. And here's the deal. We're not stopping. We're going to 20,000. We're going to 100,000. We're going to keep going because this is fun, number one, and I love helping people learn how to become self-made web designers themselves. This week's guest is a phenomenal educator and developer. He's somebody that I met this last year, but I have been following for quite some time. Zac Gordon runs the website JavaScriptForWP.com. His courses have been incredibly instrumental for me and for a lot of other people learning web development. And Zac not only does web development, but he's also got a master's in education. So he has an amazing way of taking these really complicated things in web development and making them very simple, very easy to understand and comprehend. We had an awesome conversation. I can't wait for you to hear him. Are you ready? Here's Zac. Hey, Zac, thanks so much for being on the Self-Made Web Designer Podcast. Super happy to have you.
Chris, great to be here with you. Thanks so much for the invite. Great topic. Looking forward to jumping into all this with you today.
I met you at probably the last event that I had gone to for the year of 2020 before everything had just locked down and we were no longer doing in-person stuff. So happy to have met you at WordCamp Phoenix.
I love that can come together. It was kind of the first one of the year, and then everything's virtual now. So glad we got that in, and glad I ended up going. It's one of the earlier camps. So thank you, Phoenix.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, your the backstory, the history that got to where you are today.
Sure. So from what's relevant, my background career-wise has been in education. I've taught high school, college, boot camps, worked at some online companies and run some of my own stuff. So it's kind of been a weaving through starting off at the root in the public school system and then moving up from that and then moving out, always just kind of being driven by how can I work with and hopefully help as many people as possible to scale. And so that's been kind of my career-wise. On a more personal level, I have some more deeper philosophical, spiritual practices and things going that really are a bulk of my life and yoga practices, breathing. I've taught a lot of these over the years as well, but that's kind of been less what I do in this kind of world, although I try to bring it all to, breathe and stretch for all sorts of folks. And the only real crossover I've had with that is I do an officeyoga.tv site and have done some things that kind of bridge that. But background in education, I started using WordPress really early. It was in like version 2 or something. Plugins had just come out. For about 10 years, I ran a web design agency outside of teaching this stuff. So I kind of had the real world and personal practice, and it was great for building sites, like when I had to start shifting from static sites, which is funny because we'll come back to that, building PHP or just an HTML site, and then plugging in a blog or some way to edit that. So came across WordPress pretty early and have just continued to use it, continue to be involved in the ecosystem over time. And so that's kind of, I think, at a high level, how I got here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love the transition. Most people that I've talked to, what they started in is nothing in comparison to what they're doing today, with education, going to web development, and you've done courses, which of course there's a tie in education there, but you've got your own company now that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So it's just cool to see, the progression of your career. And the thing that like really drew me to your courses was just how simple and easy you made learning things like WordPress and JavaScript for people who are absolute newbies. And I think one of your Udemy courses on WordPress was one of the first where it just started clicking for me. And so you actually have a master's in education, and I feel like that probably plays into your ability to teach. So what have you found along your career that has been maybe hiccups for people who are trying to learn web development on all levels, from WordPress to JavaScript to whatever front end stuff? And how have you helped people get over those hurdles?
Wow. Well, patience and understanding and experience. I've taught folks who are 60s, 70s web development, and I've taught folks who are in middle school, and the whole range in between. And I think what you see, so I'll talk about a couple levels to it. One is just the technology, right? The ability to type, the ability to navigate a computer, to know where files are stored, maybe eventually know where like hidden files are, and using something like a command line tool, and just understanding how the internet works. To a lot of people, this is just kind of pure magic through the airwaves, and understanding what servers are and what a browser is and how that request and exchange is made. And then on the server that you have a database and server-side languages, client-side languages, stuff compiled. Like, this is a lot. And when you jump in, especially like if you just jump straight into WordPress or JavaScript, and these are things that are unknowns, you're going to find yourself hitting a lot of walls. And I think one of the biggest things you see with folks early on is not knowing what they don't know just about how everything works. So I find that if I'm designing a curriculum, I like to take that into account and either be super clear up front, like, hey, here's where I'm assuming or start at the beginning. And I try to teach in a way, and this came out of teaching in high school and wanting to get what we'll get into here is like to learn HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript, WordPress. Like, this whole stack is a lot of things. So I've always been focused on what's the core stuff you need to understand and do to get the farthest. Right? Because you could take years of JavaScript programming and never even apply it to the web. And so that has been something I always try to consider. And I try to write even, like Gutenberg or advanced courses in a way that if somebody has enough of an understanding of how things work, that they could hopefully get through it and do something good with it. So I think that is one of the main obstacles you see early on. The next one is going to be the frustration before you get the successes. You want to go in and customize this one little thing, or you want to go and be like a Envato $1 million theme seller, right? And there's a lot of steps along the way. So when you're doing this on your own, it's tough because you get frustrated. I'm sure you've been there, right? Like you don't even know what to look for. You're trying to solve it. I wish I just had somebody here. And that's kind of always been my impetus for teaching and exploring education, is to help bridge that gap. Because I think without a network or someone to ask or someone to keep you motivated, the little successes bring you the motivation. But that's another component that if you're not doing it in person or you don't have access to that teacher or other people. That said, most people who kind of continue on in this field, they often say, like, after 3 years in a career, whether you really have it and want to keep doing it, or you're just kind of like, that's not for me. Don't have computer science background, aren't technology experts, maybe aren't even super designy or analytical or programmatic in their thought, right? But through piecing it together and weaving it in, I notice that most people who have success with this are self-learners, folks who could take that next step. And that's something that is hard to teach. You could develop it. And sometimes your external conditions force you to develop it. But that's probably one of the other major things. Now, in the nitty gritty, like the JavaScript language, which I've taught a lot of and been very fascinated by, is like a funky, weird language with tons of different rules and this not. So I find that when I'm approaching teaching, like I have an in-depth JavaScript course, I really try to give as much of a background as possible sometimes with things to really explain, because if you jump in copying and pasting code or just trying to code something advanced for years and years and years and years and years, you're going to hit points where you just don't know. And it might just take an extra 30 minutes, an extra day or two of study to put that together. So with those complicated things, again, it comes back to, do I understand how all these pieces work and fit together? Off the top, that's kind of what comes to me. There's just a ton to learn. So finding a learning path that keeps you motivated and then hopefully making money from it is the path I've found you kind of want to weave, and where I try to help people.
I think a lot of people have this misconception when it comes to being, a career web developer or having, some type of freelance side hustle or full-time business or whatever. That if you're doing it, you're pretty much coding nonstop throughout the day. Your just fingers are flying and all you hear is the clicking and clacking of the keyboard. And, like if you go into any tech company or any agency, like you just really quickly find out that that is not the case, that most of the time, people are looking stuff up and Googling and then copying and pasting what they find and then trying to, tinker with it until it begins to work. So I think one of the biggest frustrations I've had from people that have reached out to me is that they are overwhelmed with what they don't know. And it becomes a real battle to just allow that elephant in the room to stay and allow the uncomfortability of like the JavaScript world is a very deep ocean and I know a very small amount of it. So how do you help people be okay with that uncomfortability? And then what are the steps to take to, like you said, like piece your way through knowing a little bit more as you go along?
Yeah, I guess the first thing that I feel is important to mention is that in the learning process, which I'm continually going through, I'm often trying to teach something that I don't know. When I first taught JavaScript, I didn't really know it. That was my avenue for learning, just like a lot of folks will, take on a project that they don't fully know. And there's this emotional process that happens during learning where you're anxious and you're kind of getting to frustration. There's a second win that kind of comes, and there are these little successes that lift you up. So me still, in the last week, I've been frustrated and anxious about something I didn't fully understand. So just accepting up front that this is going to continue. You're not going to get over this. You're just going to get really good at it and comfortable with it and the emotional feelings that go along with it, right? Like a lot of web developers in this field can get really frustrated and stuck and just kind of be like, all right, I'll just walk away and come back, right? So knowing that up front, I think is really important, because that ocean is not going to go away. Like I still feel like I know a drop in the ocean of the JavaScript world, and I know a lot more than other folks, right? So that doesn't end. From there, see, it's hard over a course. I really have liked teaching boot camps. I've liked teaching in person. I like learning in person. I gravitate towards, at this point, a lot of it's online learning, but when I have the option to like that, because then I could ask questions. I could, they're going down here, but my mind jumped over here because I don't know this. And I want to interrupt or jump in and be like, what? And so I think that having that is a helpful thing that's hard to recreate in kind of our modern online self-paced copy stuff from, wherever you're finding the answers type thing. So It's a tricky one, I think. So without getting specific about all the details, then my generality is like, just know that this is part of it, and, try to set up some learning environments for yourself where you can get those answers.
So it sounds like a lot of what I'm hearing you say is the relationship of having somebody to be able to talk you through your hurdles. Like you say, you prefer doing boot camps. And that's, I'm going to assume that's because you like the interaction of being able to say, okay, here's your misunderstanding. And have you, obviously you're a proponent of that, but have you seen people who have been able to just watch an online course and just crush it and figure it out on their own? Or do you feel like doing it with the relational aspect is like probably the only way possible?
No, there's definitely learning styles, for 10 people in a boot camp, each of them are going to learn. There's going to be someone who's way more advanced and picking up on their own. There's going to be someone who wants that hand holding. There are definitely online courses and ways of doing that tons of people are learning, and it works well. Now, the cool thing is most online courses will give you some way to like ask a question in a forum or contact support or something, so you have those. But that's why I said like the self-learner, the self-motivated learner tends to do best in this field because you know how to ask your questions. Now, I mean, there's little tricks that you learn that you might not even realize you're doing, like how to search for the same question 5-10 different ways, how to stop using Google because their front 2 pages are so stacked sometimes. So you might need to search through other methods and means, and again, just having, there's plenty of people that just jump in and start doing this stuff on their own, but it's not everyone. And it's probably not everyone who might think, man, maybe I should get into this, that are comfortable with that. But does it happen? Definitely. And some people don't even ever take a course. They just go start hacking away. But that's not me. I tend to need a couple courses. And the other thing I find that's helpful is maybe watch 2 or 3. Because that first one might give you some, the other one might give you something. And I find it usually takes a couple times learning to really get it down sometimes. So
I've seen quite a few people go a lot of different routes. And I know for myself, I have to have that relational aspect with it, have to have the community driven aspect. And then I have to have a motivator too. I have to have a carrot at the end of the road. Like if I'm just doing it for myself, I find that I tend to get less and less passionate about it. But if I have a client who I've been upfront with about, I'm not 100% sure I can do this, but I'll give it a shot and I'll give you a great price because I know you're taking a risk on me. Like that creates this piece of motivator for me that helps me to keep going and move forward. So what are some different motivators that you've seen people that you've taught like put in front of themselves or help them to keep going when things do get difficult?
Good question. So I'd say for some in this field, the sheer curiosity and enjoy of learning and understanding how technology works and how things work is honestly a lot. Like a lot of folks in this field could just sit around and sometimes do, and just learn like, what's this? And the other thing I wanted to mention from before is like, don't always think of your learning as a direct line. Like I'm going to get to here. There's a lot of like lateral spin-offs. You might watch one video and Google 5 different things and then go down. I think the financial and family one is definitely one. I get a lot of folks, I think especially the more structured forms of learning and often the more expensive tend to come from folks who might have a bit more of a pressing issue that they need to support their family. Times are changing, things are shifting. They want to update their resume, their offerings. So that one's kind of a non sequitur. They just show up and start doing it, right? Or not a non sequitur, but it's not really, it's pretty apparent. Get a lot of folks who just want to come into the field because of what the field offers, right? And what the field is offering is actually just your lifestyle. They don't want to be stuck in an office. Well, I guess we got to update this a little bit now, but like they want remote work, right? But they want that for their own kind of freedom. They want to have more time with family. They want to have more time outdoors. They want to just have an overall improved quality of life, which I actually believe that being a web developer can bring a pretty good quality of life as long as you freaking balance it, because too many people get off in the deep end and it becomes unhealthy. and psychologically, familially, physically. So I think that that's another big one that I've seen of just wanting to set themselves up for a quality of life that's a little bit different. Some folks are feeling they're outdated and they want to just keep themselves relevant. And then this borders onto a whole other conversation of how do you find employment? How do you find jobs? What kind of mindset do you need for that sort of thing? What type of jobs would work for you? How do you interview? How do you do well? Like that's something that I always brush up against. I don't usually go too deep into it. Some people focus just on those skills, but a lot of that then I find they have kind of intermixing components when we get into those motivating factors, and like one might compel the other to learn a little bit. But I think at a high level, that and just the pure geekiness and enjoyment of it, some folks just honestly like doing it for their own projects is enough. And a lot of folks get into it that way because they started their own site. Sometimes it meets another need. When folks have big businesses and they just want to run their website on their own, I've had a lot of people reach out over the years like, hey, can you train me to do this? My encouragement is usually like, let the professional do that. So that tends to be a motivator that I'm like, you are starting, there is a stack of stuff you have to learn. If this was your profession, you could work your way through it, but just let the professionals do that and pay them well to do it. So that's the one motivator I find less. It usually won't take them as far. They'll kind of give up along the way, in my opinion, kind of rightfully so.
I've seen a lot of those same things with people who have started with the course that I've built and either didn't make it all the way through or said this wasn't for me or just kind of kicking the tires. And, for me, it's been a combination of so many of those things that you mentioned that helped me to grow and to keep pushing, because there are seasons where you don't feel like you're making any progress or breakthrough whatsoever. What would you say on the flip side of that? Speak to this as much as you can with the people that you've helped to process through learning. What are some reasons why people have come to the conclusion that, this isn't for me? Like I gave it a shot and I'm just not cut out for this stuff. And that always surprises me. Like I'm on subs in Reddit and see people say I've been doing software engineering for 10 years and I just don't want to do it anymore. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like I love this stuff. Like I would do it for free, but obviously it's not for everybody. And so what are some key indicators that maybe this is it? Maybe it's time to go look in another avenue.
Wow, that's such a good one in so many different areas. I mean, it's kind of funny. One of the things that's coming up a little bit more now, but didn't used to see as much, is just not wanting to be at a computer, like legit just getting sick of the ion spray and that lifestyle. I think also too, what happens sometimes is maybe they're working one type of job and don't realize that there's company culture can change so much about working. So maybe you just got so sick of that grind. You're at that marketing firm, you're in that big agency, you're at the huge corporation, and that kind of gets old. I know that I don't know that it's getting out of the field, but another thing related is like, you actually don't need to know everything to perform well and have a job, right? So a lot of times you'll see folks getting outdated. They're perfectly good at their job. They're banging out stuff, but they haven't kept up with all these frameworks. Like a lot of folks are experiencing that with JavaScript. You don't actually need to know JavaScript to be a WordPress developer now, despite what my site and all my other videos will tell you, because you really only need to know this. So some folks get to the point where they don't want to keep learning and learning and learning. And maybe a lot of folks just have another interest that they go to. But it's funny because more often than not, I see folks switching careers into web development, into this kind of work, than out of it. Another thing that happens is folks realize that they actually like people more, right? So you were at I do everything agency and you realize, wait, I could just go get clients and cater them through the process and I don't ever have to touch it. So they start outsourcing stuff, right? And then they realize, oh, maybe I want to work internally with managing people. I want to work with the client and maybe I'm just now really into marketing, because what happens is as you begin doing the web development and you realize like you're just a real small part of a much bigger thing that makes an online business or an online platform successful. And you might find, oh, I didn't realize, but I want to go do that other stuff. So I know that there's a lot of tangential movings. But in my experience, from what I've come across, I usually see less people leaving than entering in. And just burnout. Like you work at a startup for too long or some of these, but that goes back to that kind of job related, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because you mentioned, it can suck you in to the point of being consumed by it. And so once you've kind of gotten off the ground, because at a certain point in the very beginning, you kind of have to be consumed by it. You kind of have to be really, it's like learning literally a foreign language. You have to immerse yourself. But that's definitely not sustainable. But you learn these habits along the way of like, man, I just got to be all into this until I figure it out. And you almost start to like love it. And like the industry, kind of romanticizes it with hackathons and all that kind of stuff. So what have you found for yourself being able to balance, having a life, having a family, having multiple interests, and yet being a successful career or business person when it comes to web development?
I mean, I almost feel like you kind of gave the answer way right in that, right? It's about the balance. Right off the bat, if you have family or relatives or friends, making sure that you're consistently spending time or interacting with them. And it's not just like work becomes your lover. Because what happens is, right, you build up these patterns and these habits that, like you said, are applicable early on, but then you're still late at night scrolling through CSS tricks or you don't actually need this information. You're just addicted to the consumption of it, right? And the thing around it and the media, social media, right? So like you said there, you get kind of caught up in it. And I think it's cool to you got to enter that stream, but you got to kind of exit it at times. I'm a huge proponent of nature, like shoes off, hug a tree, in the woods, hopefully on a daily, regular basis, even with lockdowns and stuff, trying to get out. And that's part of why I'm shifting where I'm even living at these times so that I could have more bit of that. And I find that it just brings me in a much more full person. And, I've been in this game long enough to like burn out a few times for different things. So that's just kind of stuff you can't, I don't know that you could force yourself to do it early on, but at some point you're going to start being like, okay, I got to do this. I think, things like regular breaks throughout your day, they say every hour or two, you should stand up, you should rub your eyes, because you have all these, electrical signals that are really intense, just pummeling into your brain and your face. And you could just kind of massage those, get those out. I'm a big proponent of breathing exercises, even just a few moments, a couple times throughout the day is going to keep you much healthier, staying super hydrated and going to the bathroom. Because the other thing that happens is you become so consumed in learning and working that you don't get up and do these bodily functions. And over years, those have effects on your organs, and your body and all these things. So really taking care of yourself. I do think we've shifted out of the Doritos and Red Bull culture completely. I think we're beginning to, find some energy drink that might be a little bit better and some snacks and rotating them. But there is a bit of that happens. So I think going with it a little bit, I usually like to have some snacks when I'm working or around just to kind of keep me sustained and engaged and going. But also those serious breaks. Those are the ones that come up. And this is really unique to me. So everybody's going to have their different one, whether it's a workout or a walk, or they just need to go listen to something. But I think getting away from the electronics and stepping away. The other thing about learning that is not, I think, part of our modern learning culture is that you need the downtime. What happens to the brain is it processes. It starts calming down. Some stuff will go to longer term storage. Some stuff will move around. And you open up for these insights, and every programmer knows that they've just had these insights in the shower, driving around, these different times. So it's not that you are taking away from your learning process to do these things. You're actually enhancing it 10, 100 times fold. And the same goes true for working. Your efficiency is going to come back up. The last thing I'll throw out is just too much multitasking, right? Like if you're going to work, work. If you're going to have like social media open and music going, I think music can help with concentration, but YouTube going and you have your email open. So I'm a big proponent of trying to sit down and focus, and you could this is how I stay as productive as I do, is like intense periods of intense focus, undistracted, and then withdrawing, so I don't know what works for you. Is that resonating?
No, that's I think super helpful. I think and I've talked a lot about this on the blog, but having some intentional structure and boundaries to your day can be very helpful. And not that you have to be rigid with those, because there are moments where you hit a flow and you didn't anticipate it coming, and you just kind of have to keep going with it. But then there are moments where you're trying to hit that brain space and it's not happening. And rather than just trying to muscle through it, like it's almost best to just say, you know what, I'm going to put my brain in a different area. And if you are an entrepreneur or a freelancer, like you can obviously choose where that is. If you work for a company, it might be taking care of something else that doesn't require a specific part of your brain to kind of just help alleviate some of that pressure in that specific area of thinking. You mentioned burning out yourself a few times in the midst of all this, and I'd love for you to just kind of talk about that as much as you feel like you can, and how you've been able to maybe pivot and come back from that, because obviously you're still going for it.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is a good question. Get a little personal here. So I know that early on in my 20s, I was teaching at a high school, I was teaching at a college, and I was running a web agency amongst my other hobbies and things. So I had a lot going on, and I often found that like I would just kind of burn out regularly, like go hard, fry, go hard, fry. And it took me a long time. I realized there's actually like this underlying philosophy about it, that is, we think that we need to struggle to have abundance. And there's like tons of studies and people who talk about these sort of things. And I think realizing that if I just slow down a bit and really just let something happen and do it well, and I don't constantly need to be running after whether it's the next client or paycheck or cloud, so taking on a lot is pretty common. And I think we do that out of like a hustle and survival instinct, and you could do it for a little bit, but you'll find that that it's not sustainable, and that it actually, by being smarter and pulling it, I remember when I was running an agency and we were doing these like 975 websites, right? So we were trying to catch all the websites that all the good web designers were dropping, and we get them a theme, we get them the plugins, we'd spin that thing and get it out. Until that point, I'd been going after the $10,000 projects, and I had a business consultant come in and say, actually, you make more money and do less work by doing these other projects, these small little ones. So, and I was like, no, I don't want to sell out. It needs to be about the art. It needs to be about, and I kind of came to my senses and shifted the whole business. So at a certain point, pulling in a professional or someone else who's in it to give you some advice on how you could work smarter, and then being fluid about it. If there's a better way of doing it, smarter way, we can't be too stuck in our haunches. And I'm a very like stuck driven person. So I'm not saying it like it's an easy thing. I'm saying it because I've had to learn it. Another big one for me was when I switched, I was teaching at a really cool online learning site. They're not around so much anymore, but they had a good heyday called Treehouse. And they're kind of like a lynda.com type site. And I switched from working with them to doing my own site, JavaScript for WordPress, which I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years now. And that I burnt out so quickly because I was like, okay, I'm going to produce more content than I did before because I need to keep people interested. And I was trying to teach all of JavaScript, which was, looking back, insane, but I was like driven. I was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be this, I'm going to put my heart and soul into it. But I worked so hard that I kind of like got to this locked in place where I started to withdraw and I wasn't doing my healthy habits. I wasn't connecting with others as much. And I got to a place where like some days I just couldn't work, and then there'd be more pressure on myself. So learning how to psychologically deal with stress and our own triggers and our own issues, like I'm talking getting some professional help, most of us could benefit from, and it's aided me a lot in how to like kind of bring myself back up or work through those burnouts. And again, that came again to working smarter. So I found what worked for me. Not everything works the same for everybody. Like my best buddy, he's also a teacher. He's also a programmer. He could do the 9 to 5. Like he locks in, he loads, and he just goes. He takes his breaks and he does it and he bangs it out. I cannot work this way. Like I'm a cat being wrangled. I can get the same amount done in a day, but it might be a few hours here. It might take a few hours off here. So what I was doing with courses was sometimes I would go hard, like up all night working, not day after day after day, but a couple of those in a week and go hard and knock out a course in 2 months. And then I'd take a month or two off. And so if you learn what works for you, you could start scaling this. I started it at a small scale, but I realized that like, if I'm going to go hard and burn out, because sometimes, like you said, you're in the flow, I might not want to stop. I might want to stay up all night. And I've just learned to grant myself permission for that and then give myself enough rest period after. And I find for me, it's a healthy flow. You can't do it every week, but you could ebb and flow in that. And so there's books out there like the 5-hour work week, 4-hour work week. These like works. I love the first part of that book. At the end, it gets into like, if you really want to live this lifestyle, just sell pharmaceuticals. I'm like, okay, I care a little bit too much to do that. But the approach of like work hard and smart and efficiently, and then give yourself breaks, whether it's within the day, over weeks, and not everybody could do that. But this is one of those things like you could find a job where that could work. It might be a smaller shop. A lot of people in this field only care if you show up and you deliver. And if you could do that, they don't care what you're doing the rest of the time. And that's something great about this field. So that's been, those have been my most typical burnouts: teaching and doing courses and being in a like screencasting booth and doing the research for it, doing the prepping, which might take me, weeks or months. And then like recording, editing, doing all this, it just got old. So actually, I did something that I was not expecting this year. And I switched, not careers, but I switched out of running an online education company. And I'm doing something different now. And it happened gradually. At first, I was like, okay, no more courses, because literally like my brain, this part of my brain is melting. I can't do this work anymore. So I went to just more boot camps, and that I really enjoyed. It's tough to make money as an educator doing things. Sometimes it's a little bit easier now in this time period, but there's also so much of it and so much of it is free that it's tricky. So I switched, and now I'm working at a company, Stratic, which I think we'll chat about at some point. And I'm a community manager and doing tons of internal things for them. It's a super creative, it's a super flexible, it's a super cool job. And I never would have expected that. But you know what? I've learned over the years, I got to listen to myself. And I think letting go of there's this quote, letting go of who you are today for who you can become, is something I've tried to model my life after. I've had a lot of different titles. I've had a lot of different attachment to communities and places and people, and being able to let go of that to step up in terms of switching gears. You might not need to leave the field completely, but you need to make an adjustment. And I think just be brave and bold with that can go a long way.
Yeah. And ultimately that's pretty scary, of saying like who I've built myself to be for the last however many years, like we're burning it down and I'm going to start over. And we're working on this a lot with our kiddos, especially kind of seeing how they're doing educationally. We're finding that some of like, we've got 3 daughters and a little baby boy. He's like 7 months old. So he's not much into learning more than just crawling and figuring things out. So, but our 3 daughters in school, one of them, like she almost celebrates mistakes. And then the other 2, they have a really tough time with making mistakes. And it goes back to that growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, and being able to say, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, and I have been successful. I can see this path moving forward. I can still continue to be successful, but what if, like what if there's even more success? Or what if this success gives me more time for my family or more time to do the things that I just love doing, like going and taking a walk in nature or, learning something completely unrelated to web development or whatever. And so, I found that like how you're defining success and even including mistakes in that. And so we actually reward our kids to make mistakes. So like we tell them they need to try and make at least one intentional mistake a day to kind of remove that stigma of, like you're like the world's going to crumble if you show up 30 minutes late to an online class, and it sounds like you've kind of mastered that. So, because you've changed and pivoted multiple times. What helps you to have that mentality?
Yeah, well, now we're shifting kind of into the more like philosophical, spiritual, for me, internal cultivation practices, because you nailed one right there. And I've got a 9-year-old boy, and like, aren't they just the teachers of us all, right? We're like, oh, how do I help them? Like, first I got to fix this in myself and master it. And then I could demonstrate it and actually show them and be, continuously supportive in that way. So the guilt and the shame, and learning that we don't get past that by getting better at whatever we're feeling guilty about, but we get better at forgiving ourselves and others and letting go of this guilt. Oh God, guilt's a killer. It's a killer. And so many of our own, we could have 12 different people and their guilt will affect each of them a different way. They won't call it guilt, but it's kind of that. So for me, I do a lot of meditation. I do a lot of like spiritual study around forgiveness, around acceptance, around like, just these practices that help us. And that is the only, I mean, I couldn't just do this just by being a web dev and learning it all. I would go insane. So, and I find that a lot of people actually, whether they're religious or spiritual or just very practically rooted in kind of reality people, that these tend to be a lot more stable and more balanced and be able to roll with that. But for me, there's this phrase that like, I forgive this for it never took my peace away. That applies to anything. Like, okay, everything's hitting the fan. I'm stressed about this, or this needs to happen, or like, I'm afraid about losing this identity. Just knowing, okay, peace is not going to come from this world. It's too chaotic. It's too ever changing. It exists in another place, and I'm just going to go there. I'm going to let some of that in. And I don't know. I've kind of always been a little fearless and reckless combination. So that's helped. I know that's not everybody's drive, but it doesn't need to be. We each have our own way. But that guilt, that hard on herself, that making mistakes and it's not a sin kind of thing, is I'm glad you brought that up. And what's some cool training for your kids too,
Yeah. And I mean, it's something like you said, I think you never like, it has to be a learned trait. Cause I don't, for most of us, like I've seen in my youngest daughter, like she is just okay. Like if she gets one question right on a 10 question quiz, she is celebrating, And so I'm like, I kind of want to be like that, like
I want to be like that.
So, but putting things in place and, a mindfulness of going, okay, what are my thoughts around this? Like, why am I feeling anxious? What are some lies that I'm believing about this? And what are some truths that I can replace it with? Like just taking a pause and just stepping back and going, because I can't figure out this JavaScript problem, it doesn't make me less valuable or stupid. Like going through those processes has been super helpful for me. So I appreciate your insight on that as well. I wonder if we can pivot a little bit and just talk about Stratix, talk about kind of the new thing that you're jumping into, because it's number one, really cool and kind of a cool new development. And so I'd love to hear about it and what you're doing.
Sure. So to back up a little bit and give context, what was happening is I was teaching JavaScript for WordPress developers, which is a niche within a niche. And I'd been doing it before the REST API, before Gutenberg, all this. And I was kind of getting into this silo of people, right? I've taught all WordPress people. I've taught, computer science in general. That's even a wider gamut. So I found myself just like as a business owner and as an instructor, like very niche, which was fun. But I just began to have this inner feeling of like, I want to find a way to connect up here. again. I want to find a way so that when I meet somebody, what I'm doing can be relevant to them and like not like eyes glaze and they have no idea. Like I've always felt like what I'm teaching is secondary to my love for teaching, right? So it's not that I just love JavaScript, although I'm a big fan. But so that was what was going on for me. And also financially running a business, anybody who's done it know, it can be a lot of strain, course development, making sure that it sells, just the strain of that. So I was kind of ready. And Stratic as a company, I'll get into what they do, but I had met their CEO, who's an amazing woman, Miriam Schwab, and I met her just traveling and speaking at different WordCamps. She's from Israel. Super bright personality, super go-getter, has a big family, has run a successful agency before. And I really liked her. Like, some people, not everybody resonates with everybody, but when you find somebody and you're just like, God, I like them, like I just really feel like I know them. I just like their smile. And so I had this feeling pretty immediately upon meeting her, and we knew each other for a while. And what I saw as a company, so what Stratic does is they take a WordPress site that when you visit a WordPress site, it runs some PHP, it runs some database calls, maybe it has a caching layer, might run your front-side JavaScript, but it takes half of that stack out of the equation. So what it does is you use WordPress like normal, and then you hit a publish button, and it publishes a completely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript version of your site. So there's no PHP to run, there's no database to call. And what this is for the average user is really cool because it's usually way faster and it's so secure. For a lot of these companies, like security is an issue. There's a lot of known vulnerabilities. Most hosts take care of this, but they take the entire site offline when you're not editing it. So you spin up a server to edit WordPress, and then when you publish, it spins back down and you close it down and it's completely offline. You can't hack it. You can't get to it. And what's cool about this approach is that technically this is what's called headless WordPress. So they use the WordPress REST API to visit every single possible page of your site, run some programming, and spit out this new version. And a lot of what I was teaching in my JavaScript was headless WordPress, but I was teaching it a different way. I was teaching it, you have your WordPress install, you build a React site, or you use a tool like Gatsby or something like that, right? Or just straight React. And you make all those API calls and you code everything in JavaScript. So you don't use a theme. You just build it all yourself. And that was really fun and really geeky. But out of all the WordPress people who could build sites, the people who could build these kind of sites are like here. So again, this was my niche, but I knew, and I still believe, that headless, what they call headless CMSs, and the headless direction of the web, it's just the trend we're going. So some folks like to ask, like, should I do it? Should I not? And my perspective has always been like, well, I don't really care about that. I'm just seeing that this is the direction it's going. You can make whatever decision you want, but more and more are going that way. The newer products that are coming out are all built this way. A lot of technology is operating this way. There's a lot of benefits. But again, if I was going with something like Gatsby or something like that, like it's just a small group of people who could do this. So what's cool about Stratic, and why I was really happy to join their team, is that it's super technical. It works in this headless way, but anybody could use it. So now I'm back in the domain of doing something that's super cutting edge, of working with a really cool and friendly company, of promoting this modern technology stack that's like more secure. Some would even say there's an environmental component where if you just publish your site once and then throw up HTML files, there are certain points where trade-offs are there's less server power, there's less electricity. So if you think about all the electricity we're using to power the world's internet, it's a lot. And part of the reason I think we're moving towards these services that are more and more static is because it requires less to power it too. So I used to make a big claim and it's like, say this is really cool. But then when I looked at the numbers and tried to actually research this, it's a little bit hard to prove. But from my heart, I feel I'm going in a good direction. Less resources, more trees, right, in general. And so the way this service works is it's a hosting company. You host with them. You log into WordPress. You click the big red button that says publish. And then your live site is served completely via a CDN. And this is the way it works. And I do think that if people haven't tried this out, what my big push is I think 30% of WordPress sites could run really well as static sites. really well. At least. There's a portion where you don't want to. If you constantly need database interaction, that is not always easy. There's workarounds, there's third-party tools for e-commerce, for forms, for comments, for all these things. But yeah, so that's what Static is doing. So I still feel like I'm a couple steps ahead of the field. I think a lot of people in the WordPress space haven't really gotten static sites as part of their workflow. They're still wondering, should I do it? Should I check it out? Would it do it? Do I have to do it? So I like being a little bit ahead of the field because then there's still the education. So what's cool about my role at Static is that in some ways, it's so far more advanced than when most WordPress developers are that they don't even know what they don't know about why they should be doing it. And this is an environment that just like, yeah, I want to jump in there. So I've joined the company in January. I've been doing a lot of internal work we're redesigning the site, we're redesigning the app, we're like building some plugins and some compatibility. Like we're stacking. And I didn't know that this would be part of my job. So I'm loving getting to like build plugins, build all this cool stuff. And once we get to this point, which we're getting to, then I'm going to turn it around more public and really push hard about how to educate folks. Like, what are the benefits of static, security, speed, scalability? How do you do it? Use these plugins, not this plugin. And really kind of shifting our paradigm, because I do think we're going to get there, but you kind of need some people to push a little bit extra. And I felt my work with JavaScript for WordPress was, maybe not significant, but I think helped a lot of developers get over that hurdle. And I'm hoping that with this, it won't be just developers, but a lot of people just make it super easy for them. And so that's been my coming on to Static and kind of what they do. And it's been really fun. I'm really enjoying it. Static, you can go check out their site and kind of their offerings and what they're doing. I'm community manager there technically. So if you reach out and chat and want to ask for me, they can forward it over to me and I'd be happy to answer questions or run you through everything. So a little bit of a sales pitch, a little bit of just lifestyle shift, and a lot of excitement because it's been really fun.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a cool concept, and you're right in that a lot of people are going in that direction, and if you think about 30% of all WordPress sites being okay to be a static snapshot of whatever they're doing, that's still a ton of websites, so because WordPress makes up however much of a percentage of the entire web, so it has the potential to really make a huge difference and really be a valuable asset to a lot of people. And most of the clients that I have had have been those who they need a website that is really well put together, that presents them really well to their people, but they're going to add a post maybe every week, and they don't need any type of like crazy updates on an hourly, minute basis. So it's really cool. It's really cool what you're doing. And I think you are. I think you're right on the precipice, just like you were with JavaScript before Gutenberg came out, so it's cool. Zac, I can't thank you enough for being on the show and sharing your thoughts. I could talk to you for hours about all this stuff, but want to respect your time and the time of our listeners. So if people are trying to get in touch with you or connect with you, where would they go?
Yeah, so it used to be just hit me up on Twitter, Zac Gordon on Twitter, but I'm not really on social media much these days, unless it's through more official work. So my site, zacgordon.com, great site, hosted statically, of course, and there's a contact form there. Just reach out. Any questions if you're curious about a learning journey. I like to help people like learn this first or that. I probably can't answer as much as your technical, okay, how do I do this in JavaScript? So less of that, but any of the big picture stuff. And Chris Uswell, man, I just really enjoyed chatting with you. I got lost in this conversation as well. And I hope it's been helpful for people. I know we all need this encouragement, along the way, sometimes just the reminders and, hey, I kind of knew that. It's good to hear from someone telling me, okay, it's right. And I think we stressed some really good, important things today. So thank you so much for the invitation here.
Zac's the kind of guy you could just sit around with all day long and just chat and hang out with. He's such a kind and genuine dude, and it was so fun chatting with him. And I know that you got a lot out of listening to his experience. I love how real he got about actually burning out and figuring out how to come back from that. Burnout is something that is really easy to experience in this line of work. And so it was good to hear some insight on how to stay fresh, how to stay focused, and keep from being consumed by all things learning web development or running a business or having a tech career. So I want to encourage you, go check out Zac's website, javascriptforwp.com. Go check out Stratic and everything that he is doing there. It's actually a really cool hosting system that is on the forefront of what is happening with WordPress websites. You won't regret it. Hey, next week we've got another amazing guest with us. The episode, of course, is dropping Wednesday night at midnight. Are you staying up with me? I hope you are, because I'm eating popcorn, okay? And we'll do it together. Hey, until next week, don't forget, if you don't quit, you win.